those evidentiary issues, separate proceedings to decide on whether that evidence is reliable enough to allow to go to a jury. I've had situations where we've had several hours of testimony from scientists about a very specific subject that's only one piece of a large trial. It can get very complicated and very intricate.
In the industry, we get exposed to a lot of situations that ultimately end in death. Some of them are natural, and those are the ones that we expect, we can digest and carry on with. And then there are those cases that we get are disturbing to the psyche and are hard to digest. As a judge at any cases, do you find that they can be quite impactful to you as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, after 20 plus years, that's something that I think about a lot. I joke with my police friends that I'm a last responder, they're a first responder. And I only really have to read about what they do on the street, but still you're dealing with the case. We have to read about and see video of documents and listen to audio of the evidence that was adduced in the courtroom. And that can be difficult because what you see from the street level cop to the appellate court, you see what people are capable of.
Oh, welcome to another episode of The Final Curtain Never Closes. And today I'm joined with a fascinating guest, Ken Wise with Wise About Texas. So Ken, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So Wise About Texas, that means you have a wealth of knowledge and wisdom in that mind of yours to share?
Well, in short bursts, maybe, yes, as I do my research. But unfortunately, it sometimes leaves as quickly as it enters. So.
Well, I always have learned that in my line of business or just working in life in general is that wisdom is not so much about what you know, it's how you can find that information. Is that correct?
No, well, I hope that's true, yes.
But then again, we have to make sure that the information we find is accurate.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So speaking of accuracy, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're an attorney, so accuracy is pretty, it's a necessity, I'd say?
Yes. Well, I've had, it seems, several careers. So I was born and raised in Houston, where I still reside, and went to Texas A&M for undergraduate and the University of Houston.
Well, us Hook and Longhorn fans won't hold that against you.
Well, I do have a daughter at the University of Texas. So
how does that fare in the family?
Yes, I've discovered tolerance. So,
okay.
At least on my part, not sure about her. But came home for law school at the University of Houston because I knew I wanted to stay in my hometown. And I practiced law for 8 years with a large firm here in town. And then I was appointed by the governor, then Rick Perry, to a vacant civil district court bench, which is a trial court, state trial court. Served there, got off the bench for a couple of years, came back to the bench because I missed it and really felt like I was called, and I think my career has shown that.
So for listeners that don't know what the bench is, can you elaborate? What is the bench?
Well, the Texas court system basically has 3 levels. The state court system, district courts, which are trial courts, and then the appellate courts, intermediate appellate courts, which hear the appeals from the trial courts. And then you have 2 courts of last resort, we call them, the Supreme Court of Texas for civil cases and the Court of Criminal Appeals for criminal cases. So judges are elected in partisan elections, but when there's a vacancy, the governor appoints to fill that spot until the next election. So I was appointed, then I had to run for election. And then in 2013, after about 10 total years on the district court bench, the governor appointed me to fill a vacancy on the appellate court, the intermediate appellate court. So I went from hearing cases, civil cases in Harris County, to hearing all the appeals of all kinds of cases, including criminal, probate, juvenile, whatever, for a 10-county district, the largest appellate district in Texas. And that's where I am today. So I've been there now 11 years, and so it's been a great career so far. Not over yet, I hope.
Yeah, so you've been on both sides. You're the lawyer, and now you're the judge.
Correct, yes.
Wow. Which one do you like more?
Being the judge is probably better at the end of the day.
Is it? So I on my own curiosity, I just have to ask. So my husband and I, we watch a lot of the Crime 24/7 channels, the Live PD and stuff, and Court Cam and all of that, fun stuff that they have available now. And I sit there and I watch the judges, and I'm actually grateful I'm sitting in front of one so I can ask the question: Do you ever get bored on the bench listening to cases over and over? It seems to be a very long day for you. How do you endure, one, the length of the day and all of the information your mind has to process? Does that get taxing and tiring on you mentally? Let me let you answer those questions, and then I have another.
Well, that's a really good question, because boredom, when you hear the word boredom, it would be easy to get bored because there is a lot of repetition. But as a judge, you're really sort of a referee, and you can't get bored. You've got to listen
so
to
you've
the
got
testimony.
To be constantly attentive to everything that's being said.
And there's some nuance to that question too, because the best lawyers, you actually probably have to listen a little less, just because you know that they're competent and they know what they're doing, and they're not going to ask objectionable questions, or they're not going to object if it doesn't matter. And so you won't have to micromanage the case, which as a judge, I don't think you should want to micromanage the case. The case belongs to the litigants, not to you. And so you don't want to have to do that. At the same time, the entire system is based on the concept that the jury only gets information that passes the reliability tests that are contained in the Texas Rules of Evidence. So you do have to make sure, if there is an objection, that you understand what it is and what it means and how to rule. So you can't afford, you can get a little bored, but you can't quit paying attention, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. So when there are some situations that get presented during the hearing, if you will, and there are objections or there's evidence they're trying to put forth that you said doesn't meet the criteria to be heard, does that mean that you have reviewed this prior to the hearing actually taking place?
Well, sometimes you're flying by the seat of your pants, but usually if it's the most serious evidentiary issues, you already know what those are. And some of those rulings can be made pre-trial. I don't want to dig too far down into the rules of evidence. So, speaking of board, but sometimes you can prevent the mention of that sort of thing without the ruling being made, which is a way to prevent the kind of the poisoning of the jury's ears to that information without it going through the reliability test. Sometimes witness number 2, whether they can talk about a subject, depends on what witness number 1 says. And so it builds on itself throughout the case. So there's lots of different ways that will occur or arise, or in different ways you can handle it. So it just depends on, each case is different. In a civil court, which is where I sat, expert testimony, in all courts, expert testimony is important, but in a civil case, it's particularly important in the sense that there are lots of hired experts on different kinds of things, and the judge is the gatekeeper for that expert testimony. So those evidentiary issues often will have separate proceedings to decide, almost like a mini trial, on whether that evidence is reliable enough to allow to go to a jury. I mean, I've had situations where we've had several hours of testimony from scientists about a very specific subject that's only one piece of a large trial. And so it can get very complicated and very intricate.
Wow.
So that part's never boring, I can tell you.
And so my second question is funeral directors in the industry, we get exposed to a lot of situations that ultimately end in death. Some of them are natural, and those are the ones that we expect. Those are the ones that we can digest and carry on with. And then there are those cases that we get that are disturbing to the psyche and are hard to digest, but we have to do our job regardless, even though it does create a little bit of a wound that we must heal from and carry on to be able to be ready for the next. Do you find that as a judge at any cases, do you find that they can be quite impactful to you as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, after 20 plus years that's something that I think about a lot, and we talk about as older judges, well, should I say more experienced judges. We talk about that because I joke with my police friends that I'm a last responder. They're a first responder. And I only really have to read about what they do on the street, but still you're dealing with the case. And so if you do have a difficult situation, I'm going to learn all the things they learned, and I'm now in these days of video and all that, I'm going to see what they saw. And it can take a toll after a while. One of the things about the court system is everything comes through the court system. Not every first responder deals with every case, but I do see every case. Well, not literally every case, but many, many more. And so, there are difficult cases, difficult things to see. But you have to, our job is to apply the law. And the law doesn't have an opinion. I mean, you just apply the law to the facts. And
it's really black and white.
It's sort of in the sense that you have the facts, and certainly on the appellate court, we don't make the facts. We don't decide facts. We don't do any of that. The facts are all determined at the trial court level. So we have a record, and we're limited to that record, and we apply the law to that record to decide the issues that the appellant brings before us, and that's it. And so I make it sound a little easier than it is, but that's what we have to deal with. But we have to read about and see video of and documents and listen to audio, all of that from time to time of the evidence that was adduced in the courtroom. And that can be difficult because what you see from the street level cop to the appellate court is you see what people are capable of.
Oh, yes.
And it can give you a bad attitude if you're not careful.
And it's interesting because in our industry as well, you can unfortunately see what I call the true colors of people.
Right.
When their loved one or somebody that's very close to them, a family member, has died. And speaking of the true colors that tend to come out from different family members, a lot of it has to do with the fact that legal affairs weren't put into place prior to the death of that person. And so you, from a legal standpoint, do you or have you ever been a part of situations where family members have been feuding over the assets and or property of somebody who's passed away?
Only on days ending in Y. As a practicing attorney, I did some cases, now that was a lawyer representing a client in such a case in probate court. And I did a lot of that, particularly right before I took the bench. I was involved in some fairly significant probate, we call it probate litigation. On the appellate court, I deal with that all the time. I mean, there's never a time we don't have some sort of probate dispute on the docket. And just so the listeners understand the difference between people suing each other over property in a district court versus a probate court is someone has died. And so in a probate court.
In a probate, they passed away.
Right. And so you have a probate court can actually exercise jurisdiction over can pull cases pending cases out of other courts if one of the parties is deceased. And so it's a very complicated set of law.
It really is. And I myself experienced probate when my mother's husband passed away. Mm-hmm. He unfortunately died 7 hours prior to signing his will.
Oh, my goodness.
And so it really put quite an interesting twist on already the fact that we had to deal with his death.
Right.
And dealing with the grief that my mother was suffering and the fact that she was, he was her keeper per se. Mm-hmm. She relied, they were elder, and she relied heavily on, him taking care of everything. And here she found herself going into the bank and his accounts were frozen, and it really turned into a tangled mess. And unbeknownst to us, there was a shark sitting in the waiting room of the bank who befriended my mother and came at her as an assistant to a probate attorney. And that unfortunately turned into him embezzling the funds of the family estate. And it turned into a legal battle, and one that I learned a lot of stuff that I wished I didn't have to learn, but it made me one for the wiser.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, not everyone plays by the rules when there's money involved to grab, and seen that too. So.
Yeah, and so I think the moral to our conversation here is it's very important to get a will drawn up, and the will is the document that the person puts into play prior to them dying of everything they want to happen to either their body or their assets upon their death and who they belong to. Is that correct?
That's basically correct, yes. I mean, it's in Texas, an individual has the ability to direct all of those things you mentioned. And if they do it through a will, the effect on the family is much, much easier. It's a much simpler, easier process.
You still have to get an attorney involved to read the will. Is that correct?
Sometimes you do. Many times you do not.
Oh, okay.
But it's so important because there's plenty of law out there on what happens if you don't have a will, but it is much more complicated and time-consuming and naturally more expensive, and you will likely have an attorney involved at that point. And
so if I don't have a will my assets automatically be probated?
Well, to transfer assets, you're going to have to go through some version of probate, is what it amounts to. A simple example might be like a car. The deceased owned a car. Well, you don't just own that car. You know, the title has to be transferred. Well, the minute you try to transfer that title, you know, you've got a probate issue. So,
because I'm not around to sign off and legally transfer that title because I'm dead now.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And the bank account's another great example. The bank isn't going to do anything until there's some order from a court allowing it to do something, because then they're going to be
And the banks can't act on a death certificate, correct?
That's evidence of death. That's not conclusive.
So I'm trying to help the listeners better understand that they may not realize that there are a lot of ins and outs that are important for them to learn prior to their own death or the death of a family member, if that is unfortunately what they're being faced with in these current moments in life, that there is such thing as getting your affairs in order, correct? We hear about that all the time.
Well, and it's easier than ever with all our technology. So I would just say to everybody listening, get a will done. Many ways to do that. Get the documents that affect the assets that you own, house, car, whatever. Put them all in one place and tell a trusted relative or whomever you choose where they are. And
now, does my will need to be notarized and filed with the courts of the state?
Well, the details, a will does have to meet certain legal requirements. An attorney could certainly help understand all those things, and how you sign a will and how the witnesses sign, who's in the room, that all matters. And so, yeah, there's some detail there, but it's still a pretty simple process.
So I've kind of heard, throughout my years of being associated with, death and dying, is that if you scribble what you want done on a napkin, that could be a form of legal verbiage after you die. Is that true?
I would say I better not give legal advice on the podcast. That sounds like a bar exam question, but those are the kind of cases that will end up in the court system. So
I got to bring my napkin to court.
Yeah, the most famous case probably maybe in history, but certainly from this area, was the Howard Hughes estate, because there were several wills, and which one was real and all of that sort of thing. And every few months, some new alleged will would appear in somebody's hands, and you would have those always make for interesting reality shows. Like if we'd had reality shows back then, I think that would have been one of them. But
so it would have been like the many wheels of Howard Hughes.
The many wheels of Howard Hughes. Actually, that'd be a great title of a book.
So did they ever get to the bottom of
it was
the
litigated.
original will?
It was litigated for years and years and years and years, and I think it is over now. Having said that, one of my friends is going to hear this who worked on the case and say, "Oh no, it's not," but because it went on for decades.
Wow. And in this whole time, his assets are frozen, or his
it's so complicated. I don't know
okay.
what was frozen and what was not, but the bottom line is there were billions of dollars involved, and so the incentive is not to quit. So
yes.
It's difficult. I've got cases in the court right now, similar situations, not weird wills, but just lots of parties and lots of money.
So we talked about getting our affairs in order, lighting up our ducks, right? Is that where estate planning comes in? Is that what estate planning basically interprets to be?
Yeah, the word estate in the context of probate is the deceased person's, what they leave behind as far as physical assets and money and that sort of thing. It belongs to their estate, which is an estate is a legal entity, like a person or a corporation or something like that. And there's a difference between the estate and the heirs. So, for example, the wife who loses her husband, she doesn't just automatically get stuff. I mean, the estate has the community property interest in those assets. And you can see just from the language I used how complicated it sounds right from the get-go. And all I said was half of it's hers. So it's very complicated. So with a will, it becomes very simple. And
well defined, especially when I find that in the state of Texas, there's things that I'm even doing today while I'm alive that because we are a community property state, there's certain guidelines that have to be followed. And I didn't even realize that.
Right. You don't ever buy anything alone when you're married in a community property state.
Yeah.
So
it's and even if it's protected by a prenuptial agreement, it still has to be divulged.
That's yet another layer of complication.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, you could see that the legal system has many different layers, and I'm hoping that our listeners don't have to discover those many layers if they take the correct steps prior to their own death or the death of their loved one. And so we hope that anyone listening, if you have questions on probate, estate planning, and wills, our internet has a wealth of knowledge, and we have amazing lawyers that they can reach out to.
Yeah, and I would strongly encourage you to talk to a lawyer, and not just
Not
Google it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We find Google doesn't know everything, right?
Doesn't know everything.
But, interesting, getting to know you and talking with you. I also learned that you were part of our industry at one time and representing our industry as a lawyer. Is that correct?
Yeah. Coincidentally, when you invited me to do the podcast, really through the Texas history angle, it turns out when I was practicing law, I did represent Service Corporation International in some matters. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that we were talking about the many layers of the legal system, and there's a lot of layers to our industry that people may not be aware of that go outside the thought process of a funeral, a casket, a burial plot, a caring for your dead loved one. There's all of these support elements that go into it. We were talking earlier about a case that you had to oversee, and it had to do with the data that was being transferred from an update of software. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that case was, I'll speak in general terms, but, Service Corporation International then, SCI, was acquiring a lot of funeral homes around the world. And, as a business model, that obviously was very successful in cemeteries. And you have to report financial data from all those entities to headquarters, and, integrating all those computer systems and building them and making them all work at the same time and doing all that was sort of in its infancy as well. And the project went awry, so I was involved on behalf of SCI for that project. But I learned a lot about the funeral industry that I didn't know, which is one of the things as a judge and a lawyer that is very interesting, because you're involved in everything. So you learn a lot about a lot of different industries and things, most of which I've probably forgotten. But, it was really important to the business that those financial numbers get reported to headquarters. That makes sense to everybody. And so it was very interesting to see that in the context of the funeral business and learn all the different
So when the software
things
went awry, kind of like, what was that, Y2K moment when we as a world was in a panic that everything wasn't going to transfer over the next day when we reached the year 2000. So kind of like that same concept of transferring that data and hope that it transferred correctly when the software system was implemented.
As I recall, the idea was it was going to be a daily reporting, and I don't recall much more specific than that, but it didn't always work the way it was supposed to work, and so I presume it all got ironed out in the end.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, and I'm sure our technology learned a lot from that, as far as, you know, where the bugs lie, right? Because a lot of times when we're implementing something technologically, we don't realize it's not going to work until we put it into practice, right? So,
well, then the internet was a bunch of telephones on modems, and so now you probably get it instantaneously, and much more reliably. Although I think certainly in Houston this summer we've experienced the difficulty that can happen when you lose power and lose your internet. And but anyway. Yeah.
So we needed help. We needed representation to help us iron out what happened and didn't happen, and what got delivered and didn't get delivered. Right.
Yep,
So
we managed to iron that out.
So as you can see, that there's another layer of legalities that are required in our business that people may not be aware of. So a little bit about your Wise About Texas. Tell us a little bit about what that is. What's your podcast?
Okay. Well, the podcast is called Wise About Texas. It's something that I started. I've loved Texas history since I was a youth, and I consumed a lot of Texas history. I was reading about it. I was enjoying it. Probably it was one of my main hobbies, and I was getting more involved. The first project I got involved with was preserving court records, which of course goes with my service as a judge, and court records really contain the stories, the day-to-day stories of the lives of members of any community. It's a vast, largely, relatively, I'll say, untapped resource of historical research. And the court records in Harris County, which go back to before Texas independence, were being stored in conditions that were not conducive to preservation. And so the district clerk at the time, Charles Baccaris, engaged one of my colleagues, Mark Davidson, who was also a Texas history aficionado, to try to preserve these records. So I kind of tagged along with him and learned about that, and we ended up raising a bunch of money locally to preserve those records, which we have done, and image those records, make electronic images of these historic records, which we have done. And you can search on the Harris County District Clerk's website. There's a whole section where you search historical records. And I want to say, hope I'm right about this, that we're up through the 1920s. Wow. But that includes periods of, 1834, 1835, and then, of course, post-independence, and then through everything that's happened historically through all those years. And so it's really important to preserve that. And that's what started it. And then I got more involved in some historical organizations, and it got to the point where a very well-known historian, who I won't name, and a friend of mine, looked at me and said, well, what are you working on? And I realized I really wasn't working on much as far as my own scholarship and all of that. And I didn't have a history major in college or anything like that. So I was like, well, I better figure out something to do. And there wasn't a scholarly Texas history podcast. And I thought, that's something I could do. And I just did it as an experiment. And after I put out 5 episodes, and my thinking was, if anyone is listening, I'll keep doing it. And at the end of 5 episodes, which I released over 10 weeks, I had over 2,000 listeners. And I thought, okay, people like this. And so that was 9 years ago. And now I'm up to a couple of million listeners in 165 countries around the world. So it's become a big thing, and it's been a real blessing. I have a lot of fun with it.
One of the things that I get approached for record, the records that are kept at the funeral homes. Mm-hmm. I get a lot of genealogists that
Absolutely.
will come to me and say, hey, can we get into your archives? Can we record some of this data? Which is very, very important, just as you said, to record documents that happened in the 1800s so this history doesn't get lost. My question is do genealogists come to you all for any information to help them connect dots of some family histories, perhaps? Does the data you have, can that help them, and has it helped them?
The data, yes, I get questions, and I don't save them. I mean, I just don't think it's my place to save people's questions, but I get emails weekly about Texas history, and some of them are, in fact, about family. Now, not professional genealogists, but, family members that are, does so-and-so that you mentioned on your podcast have any connection to this town, or did you run across this in your research, or where can I go to look and find more? And so I do my best to help them with those questions. But I don't, as a podcaster, in my podcast work, I don't, aggregate a bunch of detailed data.
So do you think the data that people have access to online would be helpful to genealogists?
Oh, it's amazing, yes. The software programs, I use one. It's about as close to magic as I've ever seen because of just the way that it went. I don't know, I'm sure AI is going to make it even better, but the ability to go find records that you would never know exist online, because you may not even know what type of record it is, has really changed the world of amateur genealogy. Now, you got to be careful because you still have to understand what you're looking at, which is the professional genealogist bailiwick. So it can get muddled and confusing, but just the basics, it's amazing what you can find. Census records, for example.
So I'm a genealogist. Where would I find this database?
Well, I'm speaking of the commercial programs, Ancestry.com or Family
Those ones there.
Tree,
Okay.
or I'm going to leave one out, My Heritage. I feel like I need to name them all. But,
No, you don't. I was asking if the database that you guys were creating on the Texas history cases, that historical
the
database,
court records.
The court records.
Yeah,
Do
absolutely.
you find that the court records can be beneficial to genealogists by any means?
Absolutely. In fact, yes. And a good professional genealogist will definitely have that on their checklist. And there are several different kinds of court records, and what's in them depends on what type of case it is. So, for example, a general district court, let's say a lawsuit between a couple of people, well, that's going to have, pleadings, which are written by lawyers, alleging certain things. It might have affidavits, which are sworn statements by the actors. Those might be of interest. You're probably not going to be able to get the evidence from those old cases. That tends to get lost or destroyed over time. But you just have to go look at the file, and you're probably going to have to travel to the courthouse to look at the file.
Okay.
Because that's probably not going to be online, because that's a county-by-county thing, at least in Texas. But some of it will be online. And so, for example, I did some genealogical research in my own family in a county north of Houston, and I found the indexes were online. So I knew what files to ask for. And then I went up there and asked for the files, and then I could get copies, because the files have to be preserved. So they're there. You just, unless there's been a fire or something like that, but you're just going to have to take a little work to get them. Now, that's a lawsuit. What about a probate case? Well, in a probate case, you have to list the assets that are in the estate. So there you really get some interesting stuff, because you'll find out what that person owns. So if that person is a relative of yours and you're curious about land or whatever, it's going to be there. That's a little more interesting. And then the big one for me, for all of that in Texas history is, because we were a slave state, a lot of the only genealogy available for descendants of enslaved people are those probate records, because that'll be the only record of their ancestor. And unfortunately, often they're only listed by a first name. But if you can get to where you kind of know who to look for, you might find them. And that's kind of the new, I think, one of the most interesting applications of what you're discussing.
I'm jaw dropped right now. I did not realize the depth of this program and the amount of information that actually can be obtained going even back to the slaves. I think that's truly
Now,
amazing.
sometimes you're probably going to have to go to the courthouse to find all that stuff, but it is a really valuable resource.
So are all records in the courthouse public accessible?
Yes. Yep. You're entitled to see them.
Wow. You're
And
entitled to
and
see
the clerks
anybody's.
listen, I'll speak for the district and county clerks around Texas. They're wonderful. And, they're archivists, they're genealogists, they have so many roles that they play, and they are wonderful. And it's been my experience every time I've had to deal with finding court files, and I don't even tell them I'm a judge. They're just more than helpful and excited. If it's some historical event, they're can't wait to show you.
And they must have some master filing system. I can only imagine how big the warehouse is that maintains all these files. And I guess my question would be, are they all in a fireproof safe?
Nope, that's a problem. And we took that program I mentioned in Harris County, we took it statewide to try to raise some money we have 254 counties. Each district clerk and county clerk are responsible for their own files. And it costs a lot of money to preserve these files. And some counties have a lot of money and some counties don't. Sometimes it's important to the county, sometimes it's not. And so it has been a big problem. We've found files that are being stored under dripping, leaking air conditioning vents. We've found files in shipping containers out in pastures. In Harris County, it was an un-air-conditioned warehouse. And the paper degrades and the iron ink they use smudges, and it's a lot of history has been lost and is getting lost if these files aren't preserved. So we try to, I say we, those of us interested in the historical preservation, especially from the judiciary, travel around and talk about that a lot because it's
so
important.
Let's say I buy an old building and back in a closet I find some old files. Where could I send those files or donate those files rather than throwing them away thinking they have no significance?
Well, if they were, you won't find court records in that building. The court records properly belong to the county and to the district clerk.
So they are
depending on their
maintained
jurisdiction. Yeah.
by some type of...
It's illegal. Now, through the years, that's an interesting topic because through the years there have been thefts of certain court records. And every now and then you'll find, and there's some of us involved in this court record preservation effort, look on the internet, and every now and then we do find original court records, and the Attorney General's office has been very good to notify those sellers that they have documents they're not supposed to have, and the sellers.
So people actually sell court documents online?
Yeah, and generally they don't understand that they're not supposed to even have them. They probably bought them from someone else, and so we've gotten a lot of court records returned. There was a massive theft in the Supreme Court. I can't remember the year offhand, where a lot of Supreme Court files were stolen. And every now and then you'll see one for sale. And there's some distinctive marks on those files where we can tell. And they get them returned a lot because a scrupulous seller doesn't want to sell something they're not supposed to have. So
correct, yeah. So it's interesting. So we're talking about the preservation of the history of humanity, basically, right? And the lineage of our families and our descendants and where we came from, our ancestries. And so, we went from talking about being on the bench and being in court to realizing how important it is to not only make sure before you die to plan for everything, but I think it's also even more important to have some type of record of your existence here in this life, beyond a grave marker. Would you agree?
Oh, I think so. We all feel differently about that maybe, but I think instinctively humans want to leave some sort of legacy. The idea that, the truth of the matter is for 99.9% of us, no one's going to remember us in 100 years, but you do want to pass along, especially if you have kids and loved ones, just kind of something, you know, and I always fuss at my older relatives to write stuff down and write down the stories and all of that sort of thing. And I do a terrible job of it myself, but, you definitely want that. That's why we have headstones and elaborate services, right? We want people to remember that.
We want people to remember that we were once alive, that we existed, and that we walked this earth at one time.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, today I think Facebook does a fabulous job of capturing memories. I tell my kids all the time, I wish I had Facebook when they were young, because I get to see all the beautiful memories and moments that I'm not there for, that I know that the videos and stuff that I'm in, my grandkids, when I'm no longer here, are still going to be able to look back onto that.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that technology back then. So the only thing we do have are records and the piece of paper and information that's on that paper that's left behind, that you as a judge sometimes have to decipher through and help people understand the true meaning of what that paper represents and how things are properly handled and distributed at the end.
Yep.
Well, I thank you so much for coming. You really
Thanks for
helped
having me.
To shed light on some of my curiosities, and I hope that we gave wonderful information to our listeners. And do you have a website that they may visit if they have any historical questions for you or any questions that got prompted by our podcast
Sure.
today?
Wiseabouttexas.com is the website. It's Wise About Texas is the podcast. It's on all platforms. At Wise About Texas is on X and on Instagram, and Wise About Texas has a Facebook page. So get on there and check it out and understand that our history is very, very important to our future.
It is.
I'm trying to preserve it. So.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.